Ladies and gentlemen, I got the fortune of hearing cryptid hunter Jeff Waldridge speak at the Bigfoot conference the other day, and I thought there's a lot of creepy things in Kentucky and Appalachia that I've talked about, but I don't think I've ever put them together in a compilation. So please enjoy this spooky Appalachian Kentucky monster compilation. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like, subscribe, hype the video, and leave a 5-star rating review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. I love you all. I hope you enjoy.
The other side.
You're not alone. Across the world, people report the same terrifying figure. Tall, shadowy, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. He's there, standing at the foot of your bed, watching, waiting. In the lore, they call him the Hat Man. I'm John, and this is The Other Side. Tonight, we're diving into the eerie Appalachian legend that's been haunting people for generations. A figure so many people have seen, but nobody truly understands. Turn down your lights if you dare, and let's step into the darkness. The Hat Man is no new legend. Unlike many spirits tied to a specific location, people all over the world have claimed to see him. But for some reason, Appalachia, especially Kentucky, seems to have more encounters than most. Most stories describe him as a tall, shadowy figure, wearing an old-fashioned hat, sometimes a wide-brimmed fedora, sometimes a top hat. No matter what, his features are barely visible, if at all, except for the feeling of his eyes. Even if you can't see them, you can feel that they're staring right into your soul. Some believe he's just a form of sleep paralysis, the result of taking too many Benadryls, or a hallucination seen in a strange space between waking and dreaming. But others, they swear it's a real entity, and it's more real than anything that they've ever encountered. One of the most chilling Appalachian Hatman legends that I have ever heard comes from eastern Kentucky. Deep in coal country, a man named James, a former miner, shared his story with a local paranormal investigator. James had been working the night shift for years. He was used to the darkness in the mines, but there's something about the blackness of his bedroom that felt different. It was heavier, like something was lurking just beyond what his eyes could see. Then one night, he woke up with a start. His body was frozen. His breath was shallow, and at the foot of his bed stood a tall, shadowy figure. The man was wearing a wide-brimmed hat, his form darker than night itself. At first, James thought it was an intruder, but then he realized this thing that he was seeing, it wasn't solid. It was more like a void. It was sucking in the light around him instead of blocking it out. James tried to move, but he couldn't. He realized he couldn't scream either. He was locked in place. Then, the Hat Man tilted his head, almost like it was studying him. James swore that in that moment he felt something invading his mind. It was like it was searching through his memories, and it was reading him like a book. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the Hat Man vanished into the night. James never saw him again. But he was never the same after that night. He quit mining a few months later and moved to another town. But no matter where he went, he always claimed he felt like something was watching him. The Hat Man was following him wherever he went. Now, that is a spooky story, but there's even one that's a little bit closer to where I'm currently at, and this story comes from an anonymous storyteller from Cincinnati, Ohio. Here is their tale. I used to bartend in a small hotel in Cincinnati for about a year. It wasn't some grand, historic place. It was just an old hotel with a restaurant and bar attached. But those who worked there knew the truth. The place was haunted. It wasn't exactly common knowledge, but if you stuck around long enough, you'd hear the stories. The chef, the manager, and even some regular staff had all seen something. A shadowy figure, towering at 6 or 7 feet tall, dressed in a pinstripe suit and a fedora. Sometimes he just stood there, watching, observing, whatever you want to call it, Other times he drifted past, quite like he wasn't touching the ground. I never saw him myself, but one night I came closer than I'd ever want to. It was around 2 a.m. A coworker and I were finishing up paperwork in the dining room. She got it up and was walking out back toward the back hall. I barely noticed that she was walking away until she suddenly backed up fast, like she had hit an invisible wall. She turned to look at me and her face was pale and her eyes were wide with tears. "I just saw the Hat Man," she screamed, and that was all she said to me. I swear, when I heard that, my blood ran cold. She ran up to me and she refused to go back that way alone. We left the paperwork where it was and we got out of there as fast as we could. I've never had a direct encounter with the Hat Man, but something about that hotel stuck with me. One night there was a crash in one of the rooms. Nothing special except for the fact that a woman had died of a heart attack in that room a few years earlier. I didn't think much of it at the time. But that night was the only night in my life I ever had sleep paralysis. I was staying in that room and the noise woke me up. I remember waking up and I was unable to move. A weight pressing down in my chest and I couldn't see anyone in the room. But I felt something. Like someone or something was standing just beyond my line of sight, watching me. I don't know if that was the Hat Man or if it was the woman who died there or just my mind playing tricks on me. But after that, I never slept in that hotel again. Some things you just don't want to risk. Now, I'm going to try to find out where that hotel is and go there and see if I can spend the night. But I have one more terrifying Hat Man encounter. This comes from a listener named Jacob. He explained his story, and then I had my friend, who is a better writer than me, make it a little bit more readable. Jacob has always been a rational guy. No belief in ghosts, demons, or any of that paranormal nonsense. But lately, something had just felt off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just that strange, nagging sensation that something was watching him. A whisper of movement in his peripheral vision, a shadow where one shouldn't be. The first time he ever really saw the Hat Man, he was in his apartment late at night, scrolling mindlessly on his phone. The room was dimly lit, and the only light in there came from the cold glow of his TV screen. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. It was in the hallway leading toward his bedroom. There was movement. It was not a blur. It wasn't a trick of the light. He claims it was a man. A man that was very tall. His body was a void. It was a darkness that was darker than dark. It was darker than anything around him, and on his head, he wore a wide brim hat. When Jacob's eyes adjusted and he realized that there was something out of the corner of his eye, he whipped his head toward the hallway, only to see that it was empty. Now he knew he had seen something. His pulse was hammering against his ribs, and he sat there staring into the darkness, trying to rationalize what he had seen. He must have imagined it. That was the only explanation, right? But then it happened again, and again, and again. At the grocery store, a public grocery store, during the day, he reached for a carton of milk, and he caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the end of the aisle just out of focus. When he turned his head, it was gone, but it was the same thing, a man in a wide brim hat that was completely dark. At work, he felt eyes boring into the back of his skull as he sat at his desk. The reflection on the monitor showed that there was a shape just behind him. A man wearing a hat, tilting his head just slightly, watching him. When he turned around, he tore off his headphones at work, spun around in his cubicle, and there was nothing there. At night, in his apartment, he started to keep the lights on because he was afraid to see the Hat Man, but that didn't help. One evening he was brushing his teeth and the bathroom mirror was fogging slightly from the shower steam. He bent down to spit the toothpaste out, and when he looked back up into the mirror, the Hat Man was standing right behind them. This shadowy figure, he said it was looming behind him. It was hazy. It was like the form was vibrating, but there was only one thing that wasn't a blur. It was two eyes, two empty pits. They were almost white. They were staring at him. Jacob freaked out, understandably, and spun around, and again, there was nothing there. The bathroom was empty. He freaked out, and that night, he barely slept. He said that every time he closed his eyes, he felt like a man was watching him, like the Hat Man was standing right there. And it got worse. Jacob kept saying he was seeing the Hat Man everywhere, stoplights, peering at him from cars beside him. At the laundromat, he could see the Hat Man reflected on the dryer doors, standing across the street from his apartment under street lights at night. Everywhere he looked, he saw the Hat Man. And then the dream started. He'd wake up paralyzed, unable to move, unable to scream, and the Hat Man would loom over his bed. He never spoke. He never reached out and touched him. He only watched. One night, Jacob woke up, and he woke up with a start. He could barely breathe. The heavy breathing, covered in sweat. He turned his head toward his bedroom door and immediately freaked out. The bedroom door that he always kept closed and locked was open, and the Hat Man was standing in his room. Wasn't in the corner, wasn't in the doorway. He was standing right there next to him, next to his bed. The void where his face should be was right next to Jacob's own face. And this time, he moved. Jacob claims that slowly, the Hat Man leaned in and those hollow eyes were staring straight at him. He couldn't move. It was as if the Hat Man breathed in his fear. He heard a hoarse breath. He claims that he heard Hat Man whisper something. He couldn't say what it was. He didn't understand it. And then the Hat Man was gone. Since that day, and it's been almost a year, according to him, he hasn't seen the Hat Man since. Is the Hat Man still there, watching Jacob? Waiting for him to go back to sleep, to drink in his fear again? Or did he get what he wanted? Who knows? Stories like Jacob's story and James's story aren't uncommon when you look into the Hat Man. But here's where it gets weirder. Many people who see the Hat Man report a deep sense of dread, almost as if they're being marked. Some say their lives take a dark turn after seeing him. Bad luck, sickness, even death in the family. Is the Hat Man just a shadow? Or is the Hat Man our subconscious? A shared hallucination? Or is he something more? An entity that moves between our world and something far darker? In some Appalachian legends, shadow figures like him are tied to the land itself, feeding off fear and lurking in places where trauma and death have soaked into the soil. Some believe he's an omen of death, much like the Mothman of West Virginia. Others think he's a demon, something ancient that's always been here, watching from the treetops, hiding in the corners of our vision, always beyond our sight. No matter what you believe, I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen the Hat Man? Have you ever felt his presence in your room at night, standing just beyond the light, in the darkness? If you've got a story, comment it down below. I would love to hear your experiences and possibly put them in another episode, because the Hat Man is something we are going to revisit here soon. Before we go, remember, If you ever wake up and see a shadowy figure in a hat standing over you, don't look into his eyes. And whatever you do, don't let the fear take hold, because once you see him, he might just see you back.
The other side.
There are some stories that stick with you. Legends whispered around campfires, writings scrawled in old forums, tales passed down from somebody who swears they know someone who saw it. But every once in a while, a story comes along that just feels different, more than a myth. In July of 2023, I posted a video on the Gorge Crawler, a shadowy figure that some say lurks deep in Kentucky's Red River Gorge. A creature that moves wrong, watches from trees, and sometimes, just sometimes, follows you. It was just a discussion, another eerie legend to add to a long list of strange happenings in the gorge. But then this week, I got an email, because that video started to get views. A listener who heard our episode decided to go out there, alone. They wanted to prove that they were just that, stories. What they found instead? Bones, rituals, a gathering of hooded figures within a cave, and something else. Something that, according to them, wasn't human. They ran, they claim they barely made it out, and now they refuse to go back. Unless I go with them. Tonight, we're diving into their experience. We're reading their email in full and breaking down every terrifying detail. What did they really see? Was it a cult, a creature, or something worse? Welcome to the other side. Here is the email that I received in its entirety. Hey, the other side. I don't know if you'll read this on your podcast, but after listening to your video about the Wendigo-like creature in Red River Gorge, I just had to reach out, because I went there, and I saw something. I live about an hour from the gorge, so after hearing your episode on the Gorge Crawler, I decided to check it out myself. I know, classic horror movie mistake, but I grew up camping there, and I never saw anything remotely paranormal. So I figured I'd prove to myself that the stories you told were just that. Stories. I went out last Saturday, just before dusk. I parked near an old trailhead, one that's not as popular. I brought a flashlight and a knife just in case. I also had a backpack with a hammock and a cold-rated sleeping bag. I also had my phone, which was fully charged. I figured I'd hike a bit, maybe camp overnight if it felt safe. At first, everything was normal. The forest was quiet, but in that natural way. Birds, wind in trees, the usual sounds. But about an hour in my hike, I noticed something odd. The deeper I got, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Then I found the bones. At first I thought they were deer bones. A rib cage and a skull were nearby, but they were arranged in a pattern, laid out in a spiral, almost decorative. Around them, small symbols were carved into the dirt and into some tiny stones. I don't know what they meant, but they looked deliberate. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the lighting was awful, and no matter how many I took, they all came out blurry. I did my best to steady my hands, but the shadows in the dim light made it almost impossible to get a clear shot. I'm attaching the best one I managed to get. Hopefully you can make something of it. If you're watching the video podcast on the screen, this is the picture he attached. And that's when I heard it. A low, rhythmic chanting. I froze. It was distant, but it was definitely human voices. Maybe half a mile ahead. I killed my flashlight and I crept forward. I know, another classic horror movie mistake, but I had to see. At first, I thought the chants were coming from somewhere deeper in the forest, but as I walked, weaving between the trunks of trees, I realized the sound wasn't spreading through the open air. It sounded contained, echoing. It was coming from a cave or maybe a deep overhang in the rocks. I ended up finding it and I started walking toward the cave, drawn by the echoing chants that spilled from it within. The firelight in the cave flickered around a group of people, casting long, twitching shadows. As I got closer, I saw them clearly. A group of people, maybe about a dozen, stood in a circle around a massive stone. They wore dark robes, and their faces were hidden by hoods. I stepped closer, pressing myself against the rough stone at the cave's entrance. Inside, a massive stone slab loomed at the center of the gathering. Candles flickered around it, their trembling light barely cutting through the heavy darkness. And on the slab, it looked like there was a person. If it was a person, they weren't moving. As I watched, one of the hooded figures raised a knife. That's when I heard something behind me. A crunching of leaves. A hoarse breath. I spun around, but there's nothing. Just darkness. Then, from the trees, something moved. The shadows along the trees seemed to shift, even though nothing should have been casting the shadows. But when I saw it, someone or something stepped forward from the darkness. It was tall, too tall, gaunt. Its limbs were a little too long. Its movement seemed unnatural. It didn't walk like a person. It jerked forward in a sudden, unnatural burst. There 1 second, closer the next, like a skipping frame in a broken video. For a split second, I thought, maybe it's just a person. Maybe some lunatic in a mask, part of whatever twisted ritual this was that I walked in on. But then it turned its head toward me. Its face. There was something off about it. The way the firelight hit it, it was smooth and seemed hollow, like its skin was stretched too tight over the skull. And its eyes, they were dark, sunken pits, like they weren't eyes at all. I should have run right then. But what made my stomach drop, what made my breath catch in my throat, wasn't just it. It was the cultist. Because they weren't afraid. They weren't running. And then it clicked. They were chanting to it. Once I made that realization, I started to look for the clearest path to get out of there. And that's when its head snapped toward me. I didn't stay to find out what happened next. I'm not about that. I ran. Full sprint. I don't care how loud I was. I needed to get out of there. As I was running, I swear I heard it behind me, gaining ground, but I never looked back. Somehow I made it to the truck. I don't even remember unlocking the door. I just know the moment I slammed the door shut, the forest went completely silent again. I've not been able to get a night of sleep since then. I don't know what I saw. Was it actually a cult? Was that the crawler? Was it both of them? All I know is the story you posted wasn't just a story. And whatever is in Red River Gorge, it's real. I haven't been back since that night, and I won't go alone. But if you're willing, I want to show you. I know where the cave is. I can take you there, but I am not going at night. And if you say no, then I am never setting foot in that place again. I need someone to see it. I need someone to confirm that I'm not losing my mind. Because I swear, when I left that night and I slammed my truck door, I felt it. Watching me. Waiting for me. And I know, because I've read these stories now, if I go back, it'll somehow get me. Good Lord. Whew. I have goosebumps just like the first time I read that email. That was crazy to read again. So, if you looked at my channel at all, I've covered a variety of stories on this channel: cryptids, hauntings, unsettling encounters. But this is different. I don't know what is waiting in that cave in Red River Gorge. I don't know if it's a cult or a creature or something worse, instant death. But I do know one thing. I am absolutely going to Red River Gorge. Now, I realize this has all the makings of a bad creepypasta, a mysterious email, check, an invitation to a remote haunted location, check, possible human sacrifice scenario, check. But I can't tell this guy no. I can't say no. So, if this channel suddenly stops uploading here soon, maybe send somebody looking for me, preferably somebody with lots of flashlights, guns, and absolutely zero interest in chanting in caves. I will keep you all updated. I will plan this excursion with this guy, and we'll see what happens. There may be a delay in videos here soon because I'm going to a conference, but you'll know when I head to Red River Gorge. So until then, stay curious, stay safe, and maybe stay out of the woods, especially in Kentucky.
The other side.
You won't find Elsewhere, Kentucky on any map. The roads leading there have been erased, the satellite images blurred as if someone or something wanted to make sure it was forgotten. But forgotten places tend to have the darkest secrets.
Tonight, on the Other Side podcast, we are diving into the chilling mystery of Elsewhere, Kentucky, an abandoned settlement in Callaway County that seems to only exist in whispers of old stories. A town that vanished under strange circumstances, a schoolhouse with a history so grim that those who enter don't always come back, and a ghost story that is far too real for comfort. What happened in Elsewhere? Why did the county cut it off from the rest of the world? And what truth lingers in the ruins today? Turn off the lights, slip into your fluffy bunny slippers, turn up the volume, and join us as we step into the forgotten town of Elsewhere, Kentucky, where history fades, but the hauntings remain. All credit for this story goes to Reddit user XXylophone. If you enjoy this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, follow and leave a 5-star rating and review. I would greatly appreciate that, and that helps me out a lot. Let's dive into it. You won't find Elsewhere, Kentucky on any map. The overgrown gravel road leading to the abandoned settlement doesn't even connect to a main road. As with most places you shouldn't go, even the Google satellite images have been scrubbed with what looks like a bad use of a blur tool in an otherwise detailed area. It was located in southeastern Callaway County, just off the shore of Kentucky Lake. Elsewhere sat surrounded by forest. Until recently, several buildings remained. I've heard stories about Elsewhere growing up, Being a Callaway County native, I've heard most of the local folklore and ghost stories. I spent several nights in Osbury and Old Salem cemeteries looking to verify stories of creepy ghosts and the various monsters that we talked about around the campfires. The most I've ever gotten was spooked friends and a bad case of the willies. I was volunteering at the senior center when a man named Earl, who was about 80 years old, told me the story about the fall of Elsewhere. It went like this.
When I was a boy, my pa and I went to the Elsewhere General Store to get some rock candy and chicken feed. I stood outside while Pa talked to Miss Ellison, the shopkeep. Pa loaded the feed into the truck and handed me the candy. Right about then, there was this loud scream from the schoolhouse. I don't know right well what happened because Pa told me to stay in the truck, but after that, we never went back to Elsewhere. When I was a few years older, I went back there with some friends. We were just dumb kids fooling around. My friend Jason went inside the schoolhouse, and I never saw him again. We spent the rest of the day looking for him, but we never found him. Later, the police did a search, but they also found nothing. Shortly after that, the county disconnected the road between Elsewhere and Highway 280. It's been about 60 years, and you're the first person to mention that place to me in half a century, son. I warn you not to go there.
I did some digging after that. The Callaway County Public Library has a pretty good archive of town history and folklore. I had read every book on the subject, but I'd never seen mention of Elsewhere. I ended up at the Waterfield Library, up on the Murray State University campus, looking through some old microfilm, when I finally found a reference to Elsewhere in the Louisville Courier-Journal. A single paragraph story covered how an unincorporated town was being abandoned for health and safety reasons. It was dated April 2nd, 1953, and there was one detail that stood out.
Located 2 miles north of New Concord, just off of Highway 280.
I waited until Saturday morning, and I made sure to charge my cell phone before parking roughly 2 miles north of New Concord, just off the side of the road. I moved about 50 yards past the tree line, and I hiked back and forth until I found the remains of Elsewhere Road. I followed it northeast for about half a mile before coming into a clearing where several dilapidated buildings stood over the tall grass and broken pavement. I moved closer to the center of town when I saw a sign to my left that read Elsewhere General Store. The windows were boarded up and the door was nailed shut, but after pulling at the boards for a few minutes, I was able to pry the door open. The weathered wood was so brittle that it popped right off and left the nails in place. I was really surprised to see that there was any goods left on the shelf in this place. Old canned goods sat rested on old wooden shelves, and an old-timey cash register sat on the counter, and on my left, several burlap sacks lay tattered across the floor. I pressed a few keys on the old mechanical cash register, and I pulled the lever to reveal several tarnished coins and some paper money. I had a sandwich in a Ziploc bag that I had brought for lunch, and I decided to go ahead and have the sandwich before putting the old money in the bag and stuffing it in my backpack. I moved toward the back of the store when an unexpected noise caused me to stand at attention. I caught the distinct sound of footsteps on the wooden porch of the general store. I turned around and peered out the door, only to see nothing. I called out,
Hello? Anyone there?
but there was no response. I crept toward the door slowly with my hands out in front of me, just in case. I slowly peeked around each corner before verifying that nobody was standing outside, and I made my way back out to the street. I was sufficiently creeped the fuck out at that point. I decided to pack it in and come back later with friends. It was just about then when I heard the crack of thunder. The weather app on my phone said that there was a 0% chance of rain, but lo and behold, the clouds overhead were moving fast. I thought about hoofing it the half-mile in the rain, but the rain came fast. Not wanting to go back into the general store, I darted into the nearest building, an old abandoned house. The front door was unlocked, and the door opened on the second pull. Standing in the parlor of this old house, I looked around at the old furniture and dusty floors, and decided to sit for a second on the old wooden chair that seemed sturdy enough. The storm raged outside, and I could see water coming in from the ceiling. Several old papers were sitting on the coffee table in the living room, and after a while, I went to go look at them. The yellow papers were single-page editions of an old periodical called the Elsewhere Gazette. The stories covered church events, pie recipes, and an advert for the Elsewhere General Store. One of the papers in the stack bore the headline,
Tragedy in the Schoolhouse.
The article told the story of a hysterical schoolteacher who had poisoned the cake that she had prepared for the students. One surviving student ran out of the schoolhouse screaming when the woman tried to force him to eat some poisoned cake. It was dated August 12th, 1936. Earl's story put him there nearly 20 years later, and I was curious as to what could have happened some 20 years after the tragedy, but not entirely willing to continue investigating. When the rain let up a little, I trudged my way back toward my car, and around the time I got halfway down Elsewhere Road, the sky cleared up and the rain stopped. When I got back to Highway 280, I marked the spot with a couple fallen branches propped up against a tree, and I drove back in the town. That night I was sitting at Mary's kitchen nursing a cup of coffee when Jerry came in and sat at the old table adjacent to mine. Jerry and I don't talk much, but we find ourselves sitting here often at the midnight hour drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes. He tapped me on the shoulder and he said,
You look like you saw a ghost, kid.
And I shook my head and I said,
I didn't see one, but I'm pretty sure I heard one.
He got a confused look on his face and I continued,
I did some hiking out by Elsewhere this morning.
Jerry's face went pale and he said,
Bullshit.
I showed him a couple pictures on my phone and he replied,
See that building right there?
He said, pointing at my phone.
Don't you ever fucking go in that building. Ever.
I replied,
I take it that's the schoolhouse.
He nodded and I continued,
What's the big deal with this place? Earl up at the senior center said he didn't know what happened, and I found an old newspaper article from about 20 years before Earl was there, but it didn't explain the scream he heard coming in from the 50s.
Jerry shook his head and he said,
Round here we don't talk about Elsewhere in polite conversation. If it ain't one of those things that needs discussing, we don't discuss it. But I can tell you're curious, so I'll tell you. Then we'll leave it be.
I nodded. Jerry continued,
I was born in '59, about 60 years after they abandoned the town. It was the '70s by the time I was a dumb teenager looking for a thrill. My buddy, Tommy Blankenship, found a picture of Elsewhere in a book up at the library, saying the town was abandoned in a hurry for some reason. We drove his truck out there and found everything boarded up, save for the schoolhouse. Tommy went inside and I stood by the truck. You could still get to Elsewhere Road if you didn't mind driving over some saplings at that point.
Jerry lit a cigarette and took a drag before continuing.
Tom let out this wail like he'd been bitten by a snake, and I rushed up to the schoolhouse expecting to see God knows what. The single-room schoolhouse was empty, and I looked all around for Tom, but I couldn't find him. I ended up going to the cops, and that's when they told me about the ghost.
Jerry took a long drag from his cigarette, stood up from his chair, and then moved to the seat across from me. There was a somber look in his eyes that told me everything I needed to know about Tom's fate. He said in a hushed tone,
So the deputy, he tells me that every couple years some idiot goes in there and goes into the schoolhouse, only for nobody to ever see them again. The thing is, the county sheriff's department knows about the ghost. He told me back in the 50s this kid came to the school with a machete and he hacked up a couple kids pretty good. The school teacher ran outside screaming, and when they questioned the kid, he said that this pretty lady that he saw standing outside the schoolhouse from time to time said it would send them to heaven. They ended up putting the jail on top of him.
Jerry put out his cigarette and looked at me with a stern face.
I don't know what happens to people that go out into that schoolhouse, and I don't want to know. But for you, son, don't fucking go back there. The county should have demolished that hellhole.
And with that, Jerry left a $5 bill on his table and walked out. Despite his heartfelt story, I felt more curious about Elsewhere at that point. I paid for my coffee and I headed out. By the following Saturday, I was able to wrangle a friend to come with me back to Elsewhere. Katie was a local college student who was obsessed with ghost hunting in abandoned towns. It wasn't very hard to rope her into coming along. I told her stories as they had been passed down to me, and that was all it took for her to wake up at 5 a.m. on Saturday morning with a coffee and a camera, ready to go hiking. Katie and I strolled into town a little after 7 in the morning. The sky was bright, but the sun was still barely over the trees. We decided to open the doors to the schoolhouse and look inside from a few feet back, trying to play it safe. I opened the doors and I shot back off the stoop and back into the grass. It was so dark inside that we couldn't make anything out. Katie produced a flashlight and shined it inside the doorway. I could make out a few upturned desks and a chalkboard in the back. But as we stood there, the sun began to creep over the trees and it started to heat up the morning dew, resulting in a thick fog. I turned to my left for a moment to look back at the general store, when Katie darted past me and into the schoolhouse. I ran right beside her, and we both stood in the dilapidated building as I begged her to go back outside. She responded,
"I could have sworn I saw a kid standing in here."
and I said,
"Yeah, that's great. Spooky kids. First time I was here, it rained out of nowhere. Now it's fog. We gotta get the fuck out of here."
Katie walked a few steps forward and let out a yelp as she fell through a hole in the floorboards to the cellar down below. I laid flat on the ground and reached my arm down to help her climb up. She grabbed my wrist and I grabbed her with the other hand, and I tried to roll back and pull her up, but she absolutely wouldn't budge. I looked down and I saw this halfway transparent woman holding on to her legs and pulling her into the darkness. I pulled harder as Katie started screaming, and the ghostly woman looked up at me and smiled in the dim light of the morning shining through the door. Katie was pulled quickly into the darkness, and in the struggle, I was pulled down into the cellar as well. Katie's screams fell silent as I pulled a couple of glow sticks out of my backpack and cracked them open. I tossed one in Katie's direction and one toward the other end of the room, and I brought a flashlight app up on my phone. Katie sat slumped against the wall on the far side of the room, and there were bones all over the room in various states of decay. I walked over to Katie and checked her pulse at the neck. It was faint, but it was there. And I turned toward the back of the room when I noticed a small sliver of light coming from the two wooden cellar doors about 20 or so feet in front of me. I crept past the scattered bones and over to the cellar door. I pushed them open only to hear chains rattle on the other side. I pushed harder and kept banging at them until one of the hinges broke, and then soon the other one did. I pushed the doors open and I went back for Katie and threw her over my shoulder. As I was walking toward the opening to the outside, I felt a sharp pain across my back. I didn't look back and I bolted for the light. I tripped over one of the corpses and fell to the ground. My cell phone slid across the floor. I looked back and the ghostly woman was almost on top of me. I grabbed Katie by the wrist and took off for the stairs, leading her to freedom and dragging the young co-ed behind me. Just as I crossed the threshold into the light, I felt a tug and I looked back to see the woman holding Katie by the leg. I tugged and pulled and cursed and fought, but this otherworldly voice from the apparition came out and said,
"Let her go to heaven."
I shot back,
"Go to hell."
and the woman's grip on Katie loosened as I fell back into the soft grass with Katie landing on top of me. I didn't wait around. I fireman carried her back to my car and she came to about halfway through the ride to the police station. In my report to the deputies, I mentioned all the bodies that I'd found down there. He would later tell me that they recovered 16 skeletons and one corpse that had been there for only a few years. The county board voted to demolish the town shortly thereafter. It was kept hush-hush. Elsewhere Road was tilled with a backhoe after the remaining buildings were bulldozed, and the cellar of the schoolhouse was filled with concrete. I went back out there one last time to make sure it was gone, and I didn't make it 5 feet from the tree line before a sheriff's deputy flashed his lights at me and told me to get back in the car. Katie won't talk to me anymore. Last I saw her, she pretended that she hadn't seen me and scurried away. Of all the things I experienced in that town, I regret not grabbing my cell phone. I had some pretty decent pictures, and as of now, there's no record of Elsewhere, Kentucky. Now, there's nothing left. Haven't been back, and from the way it sounds the county handled it, I don't think there's anything to go back to. But just in case, don't go to Elsewhere, Kentucky. You won't find Elsewhere, Kentucky on any map, but if you listen closely, the story is still being told. Abandoned roads, eerie disappearances, and a schoolhouse with a history too dark to be forgotten. What really happened in Elsewhere? Is it just another town lost in time? Or is something still lurking among the ruins?
The other side.
Deep in the Appalachian foothills of Kentucky, an old family held onto a set of rules. Rules that seemed a bit strange, even ridiculous at first. Don't whistle in the woods. Don't go into the woods alone. If you hear your name being called, don't answer. And if you see somebody in the woods that you think you know you didn't. Tonight, we're diving into a first-hand account from No Sleep, a story about an unknown entity, a dark family secret, and an eerie set of warnings meant to keep something or someone out. But what if warnings weren't enough? What if it got in? Our storyteller was just 11 years old when he experienced something he still can't explain. He lived with his father and grandmother in a holler, a deep valley between foothills, where the only neighbors were family. His grandmother laid down the rules. You don't answer if you hear your name called, you don't whistle, and if you see something that looks like someone you know you didn't. And he followed those rules his whole life. Until one warm August night, he and his father were camping just a short walk away from their home. The woods were alive with sound, the chirping of crickets, the babbling of a nearby stream, the rustling of trees. His father left to check on his grandmother, leaving him alone with the fire. But within minutes, everything changed. The forest fell silent. No crickets, no wind. Even the sound of the stream faded out, like it had been swallowed by the dark. And then he smelled it. An awful, disgusting, metallic tang. It was so strong that he could taste it in the back of his throat. The fire started to flicker. His chest tightened, and just as he started to panic, his father returned to the campsite. But instead of comfort, his father was furious. "Did you throw something in the fire?" he yelled. "I can smell burning metal." The boy just shook his head. The fire was untouched. His father's face darkened. "Storm's coming. Let's go," he said. And so they walked home, leaving their tent behind. The rain had just started falling when the first bolt of lightning flashed, and for a split second, everything was as bright as day. And that's when he saw it. A figure, just past the yard, across the stream, just beyond the first line of trees. The light just vanished after that, leaving only darkness, and his stomach turned. The next flash of lightning came, and the figure was closer. It stood between the trees now. The shape was just wrong. The head was too big. The arms, they were too long. It was like a blind man's drawing of a person, warped and unnatural. Another flash. The thing stood in the middle of the road. No hesitation, he and his father turned and ran inside. His grandmother didn't even question him and his father. She ordered his father to lock every single door and window. Her hands were shaking as she spoke. That night, he slept in her bed. The next morning, they went out and found the tent. The door had been torn open, not cut, not clawed, but pulled apart. Up the road, his uncle's chickens were found dead. No blood, no heads. For weeks after, kids weren't allowed to wait for the bus alone. Nobody spoke about what happened. And when years later, the storyteller finally mentioned it again, his aunt cut him off. Her voice was sharp with fear. "Don't you talk about that. Don't you put that evil on them." And that was the moment he realized. They knew. They had always known. And upon digging a little deeper, there was a name for what he saw that night. The Goat Man. The Goat Man legend stretches across the country, but in Appalachia specifically, it carries a really heavy weight. Stories describe the entity as something that mimics human voices, calls to people in the woods, and appears in a form that is almost, but not quite human. Those who encounter it often report the same strange details. The overwhelming metallic scent, unnatural silence, and the unshakable sense of being watched. I myself have never seen the Goat Man, but growing up in Kentucky, you always hear about the Pope Lick monster in Louisville. But I always heard stories, especially about Devil's Creek, near Cumberland Falls. They say that the Goat Man stalked the woods there, waiting in the dark for anybody foolish enough to drive through at night. But what made Devil's Creek different was the origin story. It wasn't just a regular old folktale. In the 1970s or 80s, a biker gang took over the small community that once called Devil's Creek home. People whisper about what really happened there. Some say they drove out the locals. Others say something much darker took place because, according to the legend, a sacrifice was made. A human, a goat, and a twisted ritual, and from that the Goat Man was born. People who drove through Devil's Creek at night told stories of something slamming into their cars, something huge with twisted limbs and burning red eyes. Others claimed to hear their names whispered in the wind, urging them to pull over, to step outside into the dark. A few people did, and they were never seen again. Whatever happened in Devil's Creek, one thing is for sure. The Goat Man is not just a campfire story, because people around there, they still talk about him. They still claim to see him. And if you ever find yourself near Cumberland Falls at night, maybe just keep your doors locked. And whatever you do, don't stop. So, what is the Goat Man? Is he a cryptid, a spirit, a demon? Some people believe that Goat Man is a flesh and blood creature, possibly an undiscovered predator that has been lurking in the wilderness for thousands of years. Others tie it to Native American folklore, an entity that wears the skin of men but is not of this world. Sounds very much like a skinwalker or a wendigo if you want to get into the mixed mythologies. More modern theories suggest it could be related to the missing 411 cases that were popularized by David Paulides. Strange disappearances in national parks where people report hearing their names called just before vanishing. Could the metallic scent be linked to the ozone from an approaching storm, or is it something more sinister? Whatever it is, one thing is for certain. Those people in the foothills, they still follow the rules. They don't go out alone. They don't answer their name in the dark. And if they see something in the woods that looks familiar, no, they didn't.
The other side.
If you ever find yourself driving through the backwoods of eastern Kentucky at night, turn around. Go back. Don't ask why, just leave. Because out there, in the deep, untamed dark, the land doesn't want you there. And neither do they. I learned this the hard way. And I don't think I'll ever stop regretting what I did that night. Make damn sure you avoid the backwoods of eastern Kentucky. Driving through the backwoods of eastern Kentucky in the dead of night is the most terrifying thing that I've ever done. Anyone who's ever been in the area knows exactly what I'm talking about. All the light from the moon and stars is blocked by thick vegetation and hills, so it is pitch black. There's a history in these hills. A lot of history. And this energy fills the place with this crazy bad vibe. It's like the land is pissed at you, and it wants you dead. The roads aren't well traveled, and you'll be hard pressed to see a single car driving down them at night. Cell service out here is, well, at least for me, spotty at best, non-existent at worst. And you pray to whatever you believe in that your car doesn't break down, knowing full well the folks who live scattered across the hills are isolated private people, knowing they wouldn't be too happy to see you wandering on their property in the dead of night. None too happy at all. It's what my mom calls bad country. She always told me to avoid this area if I could, saying that I'd likely be murdered or worse out there. And I've heard the stories too. Stories about people getting out of their car to help a stranded motorist, only to be ambushed, robbed, kidnapped, and murdered. Stories about strange lights, ghost killers, and vanishing hitchhikers, along with the crazy inbred hillbilly families roaming through the forest. There are said to be hundreds of unreported deaths out here. People just vanishing off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. I've always avoided driving through those hills. But one night, I found myself driving straight down Kentucky 52 South instead of I-75 South, straight into those hills, straight into the mouth of the darkness. Around midnight, I got a message from my mom that my dad had been taken to the hospital and his condition was pretty serious. I immediately jumped out of bed and into my car, despite my mom telling me to wait till morning to drive down. I lived up in Richmond at the time while I was going to Eastern Kentucky University, while my parents were down in Hazard. It was a little under a 2-hour drive by I-75 South, and a little over 2 hours by Kentucky 52 South. That night, though, 75 was closed due to an overnight bridge reconstruction plan. So I had to take 52 southbound, and it goes through some pretty gnarly, bad country. I figured nothing would happen. It'd be a smooth yet anxiety-ridden drive. 2-hour trip, but I'd be there and back. All there was dread, but I couldn't shake the feeling boiling in my gut, urging me to wait until morning. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had to see my dad. He was always there for me as a kid, and it was time to repay that favor. First off, it was really dark. Really fucking dark. Even with my bright lights on, they still only barely lit up the surrounding area. The constantly curving roads didn't help either. I found myself slowing down, navigating through the dark around the switchbacks and turns, inclines and depressions, roller coastering my way through the woods, hoping to God I didn't run off the road or hit an oncoming vehicle. And the dread was at the forefront of everything now. Sure, it could have been exacerbated by the worry for my dad, but there's something about those hills if you've never been there. Something evil. Something always lurking. And I was fucking afraid. The radio was going in and out, so I put in a CD, and I tried to drown out the fear with music. After the first song, I turned off the stereo completely and drove in silence, all of my senses on high alert. It felt wrong. I felt like I was being watched. Every so often, I would see a light flash in the woods, like a campfire, but brighter. And I swear at one point, between Crystal and Beattyville, there was this pale, hairless, and huge humanoid running after the car next to the road. Swear I saw it in the rearview mirror, and no one believes me. It disappeared in the darkness when I hit my brakes and turned around to get a better look. 30 minutes outside of Beattyville, I saw a kid. He was wearing a yellow shirt, blue shorts, and a red jacket with the hood up. Colors that reminded me of Superman, and it stood out to me. He wasn't wearing any shoes, and that really bothered me. I flicked my bright lights down to their normal strength and slowed to a crawl, wondering what the hell this kid was doing. He looked to be under 10, and he was out here in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. I made sure my doors were locked, cracked my window, and I asked him if he was okay as I rolled the car slowly toward him. He didn't respond. I glanced down at my phone. Sure as shit, no service. I asked him again if he was okay, and he looked up at me quickly, making his hood fall down. He was crying. I slowed to a stop, and he immediately ran over, sticking his dirty fingers into the crack of my window, pounding on the door. He was screaming about how they were hunting him, and how they were going to let a monster eat him, and they were watching us right now, waiting just beyond the darkness. At this point, I was seriously freaking out, and I might have been screaming too, but I can't remember. I tried to roll my window up, but I wasn't trying to hurt the kid, but he wouldn't release his grip on the window. I think he was trying to break it. A bright light flashed onto us, and the kid screamed even louder. He let go of my car and began running back down the road toward Beattyville. And I'm ashamed to say this. I took off. I was afraid. I thought I was going to die and become another statistic of these fucking hills. In my rearview mirror, I watched what looked like 3 hooded men in robes run out onto the road. The spotlight one of them was holding was trained on my car, and it hit the mirror at an angle that blinded me, but it looked like the other 2 started running after the kid. I blinked and looked back toward the road, and I was speeding like a bat out of hell. I pulled off in Jackson and drove straight to the police station. 2 detectives and an FBI agent who happened to be in town with a liaison listened to me with grave faces. When I finished, the FBI agent thanked me, and he told me a kid had gone missing the day before from a Bible camp near the Kentucky River. He said that's why he was in town in the first place. The kids and his friends were out playing hide and seek in the woods in broad daylight when he just disappeared. He was wearing yellow, blue, and red, just like Superman. The strange thing is, his footprints just stopped in the woods, but his shoes were still there. It was like he was lifted off the ground by air. It was weird according to the FBI agent, but when I told him he was barefoot, he looked at me very confused. 6 cop cars and twice as many cops, the agent, and search and rescue teams were dispatched in the area within minutes after I reported what I'd seen. I drove to a local diner and stayed in Jackson until morning, making the 40-minute drive down to Hazard after the sun rose. After hearing why it took me so long to get down there, my mom was beside herself in panic, but was also glad I was okay, telling me I did what I had to do to survive, that I was brave, I wasn't a coward, and my dad ended up making a full recovery. Now, if you've listened this far and you're wondering if I do feel like a coward, and if I regret not letting that kid into my car, the answer is a resounding yes. I do. I am. It haunts me to this day. I don't know what would have happened if I stayed there any longer, and I don't know if either of us would have made it out alive. I keep checking for updates, but no trace of the kid was ever found. Some nights, I still see his face. The way he looked at me, desperate, terrified, pleading. I tell myself I did what I had to do, that I survived, but I'll never really know what happened to that kid. And maybe it's better that way.
The other side.
Welcome back to The Other Side, where we explore the eerie, the unexplained, and sometimes the downright terrifying. Today's episode is dedicated to those quiet moments in the woods, where your breath fogs in the morning air, your heart slows with anticipation, and something may be watching you from the shadows. These aren't just creepy campfire tales. These are real encounters reported by hunters right here in the backwoods of Kentucky, a place where the veil between our worlds and the unknown runs a little thinner. Today you'll be hearing 3 spine-chilling accounts. One of a ghostly bride beneath a tree stand, a cryptid lurking in Spencer County, and a UFO encounter deep in the land between the lakes. So lock your doors, grab your thermos, settle in, and if you're watching on YouTube, enjoy the Red Dead Redemption gameplay in the background. I'm working my way toward 100,000 subscribers, and I'd like for you to be a part of that because I really want that YouTube play button before I die. Subscribe on YouTube or give a 5-star rating review if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast. If you enjoy this kind of content, that helps me a lot. These are Kentucky hunting horror stories. Let's get into it. The Woman Beneath the Tree Stand. Clint had been hunting in the Daniel Boone National Forest for nearly a decade. Tucked deep into the hollers and ridgelines of eastern Kentucky, it was a sanctuary to him. Crisp November mornings, the smell of pine, the solitude, it was completely peaceful. He had set up early morning, long before the sun peeked over the hills. Perched 20 feet up in his climber tree stand, he waited. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of crows. As the blue hour crept in, the time just before sunrise, Clint noticed something different on the forest floor. A figure. He then realized it was a woman. She had made her way directly under his tree stand without him knowing. She stood directly below him, barefoot and in a long, flowing white dress. Her hair was long and dark, falling in tangled waves that covered her face. At first, Clint figured she must be lost, maybe a hiker that had wandered too far, but then he slowly began to realize there was no trail near here. He was a solid 2 miles from the closest road. Growing concerned, he whispered, "Ma'am?" No response. He called down again, louder, "Ma'am?" Nothing. She didn't move. She didn't even look up. She didn't sway with the wind or make a sound. She just stood there like a statue placed directly underneath him. Clint felt his chest tighten up. He reached for his rifle, not to aim at her, but just for comfort. That's when she tilted her head up and looked directly at him. Her face, however, shook him to his core. It wasn't a pale face, it wasn't a strange face. It was completely blank. This woman had no eyes, no mouth, no nose, no eyebrows, just smooth skin where the face should have been. It was like somebody had erased her identity entirely. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then, without a sound, the woman vanished. One blink and she was gone. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just the cold air and silence in the forest again. Clint climbed down as soon as daylight hit and never hunted that patch of forest again. He refused to go back. When he mentioned the story at the local bait shop a week later, the man just nodded solemnly and said, "You seen the faceless bride. Some say she died on her wedding day, years before the Civil War. Hung herself near the church that got swallowed up by the forest. Shows up to hunters. Always shows up to men. And she's always silent. They say if you see her, you've walked too close to the dead heart of the forest, and you should stray away from that area." Before we move on to the next story, I just want to add, this took place in the Daniel Boone National Forest, according to the person that had sent me the story. The Daniel Boone National Forest is where Cumberland Falls is, and the story I grew up hearing is if you drive down the Falls Road toward Cumberland Falls on foggy nights, moonlit nights, spooky urban legend stuff, as you go around one of the curves toward the falls, you see a ghost bride in the road. And allegedly, a woman and her husband got married at Cumberland Falls, and she slipped off the edge of the falls and drowned, and now her ghost haunts the area. So it's kind of cool that I got submitted a story that, resembles that urban legend from my childhood. The Elk Creek Howler. Spencer County isn't known for much beyond farmland and thick patches of wood near Elk Creek. But if you ask the locals, and I mean really ask, they'll tell you about something else. Something that lives between the trees. Ben and his cousin Jason were turkey hunting just before Halloween. They had been hearing gobblers on the ridge for days and finally decided to track them just before dusk, when the birds often roost. The woods were still, eerily still. Not a squirrel, not a bird, not the wind in the trees. And that's when they heard it in the woods. A scream, a very high-pitched scream that they knew wasn't human in their gut. It echoed off the hills, and then they heard a low, guttural growl. And that was close. Real close. Jason spun in a circle with a shotgun raised, thinking it was a coyote. Ben, on the other hand, when they looked at each other, Ben said, "That ain't no damn coyote." Then they saw something step into view on the opposite ridge. It was massive, and it was at least 8 feet tall. This creature was covered in thick, patchy fur like a wild animal, but it was walking upright. It wasn't a bear and it wasn't a man. It had long arms that they claim hung down to its knees, and its shoulders were impossibly broad. They said it was as wide as a Jeep. It stared directly at them, and they saw the eye shine in the low light. They didn't move, and neither did this thing. Then in one lightning-fast motion, the thing dropped on the all fours and bolted down the slope, and it was covering ground faster than Ben or Jason had ever seen. The two men were scared, obviously, and they started running, tripping on roots and branches and everything, and they were too scared to look back. They could hear this thing behind them at this point, but they didn't think it was chasing them, just following them. because by this point, they knew it had to slow down or they would have been attacked. It was staying close, almost like it was herding them out of the forest to make sure they left. When they got back to the truck, Jason swore he saw its silhouette watching them from the tree line, still silent, and if he could see the eye shine, probably unblinking. Since then, the story has gone around, and locals have taken to calling it the Elk Creek Howler. Some believe it's a regional Bigfoot, others say it's something far older, maybe a remnant of Native American lore, a guardian spirit, or something else more savage. Whatever it is, it doesn't want people in its woods, especially during the fall hunt. Wow, that's crazy. When I was sent this story, I thought it was going to be a Bigfoot story when I read it, but the person who sent it is kind of adamant that they don't believe it's a Bigfoot, they believe it's something else. What else? A dog man? I'm not sure, but something is lurking around in Spencer County. The lights over Livingston County. Mike was a solo hunter, always had been. Said he didn't like people messing with the quiet of the woods. He set up camp every year near the land between the lakes, a place known for deer, turkey, and Bigfoot stories. This was in October of 1999, and he picked a clearing half a mile from the river and he set up camp with his tree stand nearby. Everything felt normal as first. He found good tracks, there was dry weather. It was perfect for a hunt. But on the third night, something changed. Around 9:30 at night, while sitting by the fire with his logbook, he noticed a strange light in the sky. Not a plane, not a satellite, not a drone, because this was in the 1990s. He claims it zipped in sharp right-angle movements, and it blinked red, blue, and white in a rhythm he had never seen before. It was like the lights were pulsing. And then he heard something. A humming. Low, metallic, almost like a distant generator, but with some strange resonance. The woods have fallen totally silent. Only the humming was out there. And Mike realized the fire seemed dimmer. The air tasted metallic, and his chest felt very tight. He looked up. Hovering just above the treetops was a disc-shaped object, silent and massive. It had a geometric underside that glowed with soft, pulsating lights like veins of fire running beneath the surface. Mike couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He froze. He didn't know how to deal with what he was seeing. Then there was a flash. Just one singular flash. It was bright and hot. It burnt him to the point he had to go to the hospital later on with second-degree burns. When he came to in the middle of the forest, his fire was out, his flashlight was dead, and it was suddenly after midnight. The first thing he noticed was the burns on his skin. The second thing was that 2 hours had passed since he sat down with his logbook. The only mark left on him to this day is a small triangle-shaped burn on the back of his shoulder. He doesn't remember getting it, and he didn't remember anything at all during that time. He claims to have filed a report with MUFON and claims that they logged it as a probable abduction, citing others in the area that same week saw lights over the lake. I have been unable to find any evidence of this claim. If you work for MUFON, let me know if you can pull those records. I just can't find anything online. Now, apparently to this day, Mike won't talk about this in public. He still hunts, but never alone, and never near Livingston County. Some say the lights return every few years, always around October, and hunters report seeing them. Maybe we have our own Marfa lights in Kentucky.
The other side.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Other Side. My name is John, and the stories you're about to hear come from real people, listeners like you, who have experienced the unexplained. Strange encounters in the woods, shadowy figures watching them from the darkness, things that probably shouldn't exist, but somehow do. If you've ever seen something you couldn't explain, something lurking just beyond the edges of reality, I would love to hear it. Submit your story by email or shoot me a message on X, and maybe next time it'll be your voice echoing throughout the night, or my voice reading your story. Either way, let's jump into the very first email that my wife has jokingly named the Foggy Creek Encounter after the Boggy Creek Encounter. Hi, The Other Side. I just found your channel through your Hatman video, and I wanted to share an experience I had a few years back while camping alone in the Daniel Boone National Forest. I don't tell this story often, mostly because people either don't believe me or they say I must have been imagining things. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. It was early October, and the air had that crisp, damp chill that comes right before winter sets in. I had hiked about 5 miles off trail, deep into the forest, to a spot by a small creek where I planned to set up camp for the night. It was quiet, peaceful, just the way I like it. I got a fire going and cooked some food, and then I settled in to enjoy the quiet solitude there is in the forest. That's when things started to feel off. The first thing I noticed was the silence. If you spend enough time alone in the woods, you learn to recognize the normal sounds. The rustling of leaves, the hooting of distant owls, the occasional snap of a twig from a deer moving through the brush. But this was dead silent. No wind, no crickets, nothing. I remember thinking it was strange, but I pushed that thought aside and focused on the fire. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, and they were just beyond the tree line where the firelight couldn't reach. At first I assumed it was a bear, but as I listened closer I realized something was different. Bears move in a sort of shuffling gait. Their steps are uneven. Whatever this was, it was walking on 2 feet, and it was taking slow, purposeful steps. That's when the smell hit me. It was something rancid, like wet dog mixed with rotten meat. I grabbed my flashlight and I aimed it toward the noise, and that's when I saw them. 2 glowing red eyes, staring back at me from about 8 feet off the ground. They didn't blink, they didn't move. They just watched me. I don't know how long I stood there. I was frozen. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Then out of nowhere, it let out a scream. Not a human scream, not an animal call either. Something entirely different. It was so loud that my ears rang and my entire body locked up with fear. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was completely frozen in place, and the next I was shoving my gear into my pack as fast as I could. I didn't even put the fire out. I just ended up grabbing the stuff right next to me and I started running back through the woods. I never think I moved that fast in my life. The worst part, I could hear it follow me. It wasn't close, but it was close enough. Every so often I heard a branch snap or a leaf crunch behind me. I was keeping pace, trying to stay just out of sight, making sure I got out of the woods. I didn't stop. I didn't even turn around. I went until I saw my truck, I threw my gear in the bed, and I peeled out of there without even buckling my seatbelt. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was some kind of animal I've never encountered before. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But I do know this. I haven't been back to that part of the forest since, and I don't plan to. Thank you for letting me share my story, and if you have any idea of what this is, please let me know. Well, you didn't tell me if I could use your name, so I'm not going to, but as a person that posts things on the internet that's related to the paranormal, I'm just going to go ahead and give myself the title of expert, because that's what most people do anyway, and it is my expert opinion. As somebody who grew up near the Daniel Boone National Forest, and I heard all the folklore growing up, that is a Sasquatch encounter. That's what it sounds like to me. If you are interested in stuff like that, there's a bunch of Kentucky Bigfoot books by a guy named Barton Nunnally. I highly recommend you check those out if you've never heard of anything related to Kentucky Bigfoot. It's a really good introduction. That's all I really have to say, because I can guarantee you I would have done the Scooby-Doo run if I saw what you saw. My feet wouldn't have touched the ground for a couple seconds, and then I would have been gone, and the only thing that would have been left is the smell of me pooping my pants, because I wouldn't have been there. This next story was sent to me as a text message from a friend of the show. They started listening to the podcast, they got very interested, and somebody I know gave them my number so they could share some stories with me, and we've been talking back and forth. The Backyard Visitor. My grandpa always said that something big used to come up to our house at night when he was a kid. He lived way out in the Appalachian hills, and one evening while sitting on the porch, he watched a huge shadow move past the tree line. Thinking it was a bear, he grabbed his rifle and he hollered at it. But instead of running, the thing stopped and turned its head toward him, like it understood. It watched him for a while, and then it walked off into the forest on two legs. Grandpa swore up and down that it wasn't a bear and it wasn't a man. He said it came back sometimes, but as long as he left food out, it never caused any trouble. That's awesome. All these old Appalachian folk stories getting passed down, they're some of my favorite things ever. I grew up hearing them. If y'all have stories like this, I love them. Send them my way. The Hunter's Standoff. I was out hunting in Pike County. It was early morning, the kind of morning where the mist still clings to the trees, and the world just feels a little bit different. It's like that game my son plays, Silent Hills. I was deep in the woods, moving carefully with a rifle slung over my shoulder. Hunting is a way of life in these parts, and I've been out here plenty of times, but something, it just fell off that day. At first, I didn't notice it. The stillness. Normally, the woods are alive with sounds, birds calling to each other, squirrels rustling through the underbrush. But that morning, I don't remember hearing anything. It was like the forest was holding its breath. Like a predator was around. That's when I caught the scent. It was a foul scent. Like rotten meat mixed with something musty. The only time I've ever smelled something like this is when I worked for the coroner's office. It hit me out of nowhere. It was something wild. Thick and heavy in the cold morning air. I stopped in my tracks, and every instinct in me screamed that I wasn't alone. Then I saw it. About 50 yards ahead, partially obscured by the underbrush, stood something massive. Weren't no bear, no way. Thing was at least 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Broad shoulders, thick limbs, and it was covered in dark brown hair. It wasn't moving. It was just hiding. My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook and I lifted up the rifle. I wasn't going to shoot it. I needed to get a better look at it through my scope. But as soon as I brought up my rifle, the thing huffed, I guess. A deep guttural sound that I felt go through my body more than I heard it. And then it took a step forward toward me. My gut told me everything I needed to know. If if I pulled that damn trigger, I knew somehow, if I did, I wouldn't be making it out of the woods. I wouldn't be alive. So instead, I didn't break eye contact. I didn't lower my gun, but I slowly started backing away, and my heart was beating out of my chest. I kept my rifle up, my finger was off the trigger, but it was ready just in case, and I never turned my back on that thing. We stood like this while backing up for what felt like forever. Then without warning, it turned. It just walked away. Disappeared as if it had never been there at all. I didn't stick around. I made my way back to the truck as fast as I could without running because I didn't want it to know I was afraid. Thought maybe it would attack. I haven't been back to that spot since. Some folks around here say that there are things in these woods that we aren't meant to see. I never believed them until now. Good Lord, that was awesome. Here is our very last story, and I love it. It is very short, so please, if you're about to click off, stay for another 45 seconds, because it's awesome. This person, they messaged me on Twitter. In our brief conversations, they kept calling me Bubba, and I asked if I could read their story with a country accent, and they said yes. So, enjoy. I was driving home late one night near the Red River Gorge when something fucking huge crossed the road ahead of me. At first I thought it was a deer, but it wasn't no damn deer, it's too tall. Its head nearly reached the lower branches. I slammed on my brakes, and for a split second, my headlights caught it. Some big motherfucker with dark hair and some of the longest arms I've ever fucking seen. Then it was gone. It vanished into the woods like a fucking magician. I don't know what I saw, but I'll never drive on that road at night again, and I will never drive on edibles ever again. Dear Lord, if you've stayed through this whole thing, I greatly appreciate you. You are not like this last person and you're zooming around Red River Gorge on edibles, because Lord knows that's not a safe place to drive anyway. If you all have any weird encounters that defy explanation, something that left you questioning what you thought you knew, I want to hear about it. Send in your stories. I love reading these. Next time I'm going to be telling your story. So until then, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the things that watch from the trees are only watching you.
The other side.
The Appalachian Mountains are beautiful, but they're some of the oldest, darkest, and most mysterious mountains in the world. Stretching from Georgia all the way up to Maine, they're full of dense forest, endless hollers, and trails that twist so deep into the wilderness that you can walk for days without seeing another person. And for generations, the people who live here have been telling stories. Stories of strange lights moving through the trees, voices that call out in the fog, figures that don't belong, watching from just beyond the firelight. Now, some of these tales are meant to be told in the dark. This is The Other Side, and tonight I'll be sharing a handful of those stories. Not really legends or campfire tales, but first-hand accounts sent in by listeners. Some of these people are hikers, others are hunters, and some are just ordinary folks driving home at night. What they saw and what they heard convinced them that something is alive within these mountains. Something we still don't understand fully. And we'll start with one of the strangest tales. A coal miner walking home late one night thought he saw the glow of another lantern in the woods. But what he found wasn't another hiker. The Lantern Man of Pine Hollow. This story was sent in by a retired coal miner from eastern Kentucky. He swears that what he saw one night while walking home wasn't just a trick of the dark, but something far stranger and far older, lurking in the holler. This was emailed to me by Daniel, who grew up right outside of Hazard, Kentucky. He told me that his father worked long shifts at one of the old coal mines there. The kind of job where you'd go in before sunrise, and most nights you wouldn't come out until after dark. Now, this was back in the early 90s, and Daniel's father didn't have a car at the time. Most nights he walked the 3 miles from the mine back home. That walk took him down a dirt road, through a long stretch of pine forest, before eventually cutting across an old hollow locals called Pine Hollow. It wasn't unusual for miners to walk together at night, but Daniel said his dad often walked alone. He wasn't scared of the woods, he had grown up there. He knew the sounds of coyotes, owls, and bobcats, but there was something about Pine Hollow that always made him uneasy. One evening in late October, Daniel's father was making that walk home when he noticed a dim glow in the trees off to his right. At first, he thought it was another miner. Plenty of men carried lanterns or flashlights back with them, but this light, it looked different. It wasn't steady. It swayed, like an old lantern being carried by hand. And it wasn't close to the ground, it was at chest level, moving in and out behind the trees. Curious, Daniel's father called out, "Hey, you need a hand?" No answer. The lantern just kept bobbing around deeper into the woods. He figured maybe it was somebody from out of town hunting late, or a miner taking a shortcut. He kept walking, but as he did, he realized something strange. He couldn't hear anything. When somebody walks through the woods at night, you hear it. Branches snapping, the crunch of leaves, the ambient sounds of the forest. But with this lantern, there was no footsteps. Just silence, broken only by the faint metallic creak of the lantern's swing. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's father saw that same lantern again. Sometimes it was far back in the woods. Other times, it was close enough that he swore it was only 20 to 30 feet away. Always swinging around, always silent. One night, the light appeared directly in front of him, floating across the road about 50 yards ahead. He stopped dead in his tracks. He expected to see a man carrying it, maybe crossing from one trail to another. But the lantern just glided smoothly from one side of the road to the other, and then it blinked out like somebody had snuffed the flame. He stood there for nearly 10 minutes, heart pounding, waiting for something else to happen, but the woods stayed silent. After that, Daniel's father changed his route. He'd take longer paths home just to avoid Pine Hollow. But sometimes, even on the new route, the light would appear, always near that hollow, always bobbing just out of reach. The scariest encounter happened about a year later. Daniel's father was walking home in the dead of winter, and the cold air was biting at his face. That's when he saw the lantern again. This time, though, it wasn't deep in the trees. It was right beside the road. He froze. The lantern was swaying slowly, casting just enough of a glow that he could see the outline of the trees around it, but there was no person holding it. The handle, the chain, the flames, they were all visible, but nothing else. And then the lantern stopped swinging. It turned very deliberately so that the flame faced him. Daniel's father said at that moment every hair on his body stood up. He didn't wait around to see what would happen next. He bolted, sprinting down the road in the snow until he was out of the hollow. When he finally looked back, the light was gone. Years later, Daniel asked his dad if he ever figured out what it was, and his father just shook his head and said, "Some things in these hills you don't chase, and you don't ask about. You just keep walking." But Daniel did some digging of his own. He found old newspaper clippings about a mine collapse in Pine Hollow in the 1920s. Several men died underground, but one name came up again and again: Ezekiel Harper, a foreman who was last seen carrying his lantern into the mine to check for survivors. His body was never recovered. Locals say that his spirit wanders the hollow, searching with that same lantern, trying to find a way out. Daniel swears his father never made up stories, and to this day, he refuses to drive through Pine Hollow after dark. Whether it was a ghostly miner still searching for his home, or something else entirely, one thing's for certain. In Pine Hollow, if you see a lantern swinging in the dark, don't follow it. The Woman on Cumberland Falls Bridge. This story came from a man driving home late at night near Cumberland Falls State Park. He says it was the most terrifying encounter of his life. And to this day, he won't drive across that bridge after dark. This was sent in by Aaron, who grew up near Corbin, Kentucky, not far from Cumberland Falls State Park. If you've ever been there, I can vouch for it. It's one of the most beautiful spots in the state. Dense forest, winding mountain roads, and of course, Cumberland Falls itself. Locals call it the Niagara of the South, and you have no idea what I'm talking about. There's literally a model of it in Red Dead Redemption 2. But there's another thing Cumberland Falls is known for: strange stories. There's ghost sightings, UFO reports, mysterious disappearances, creatures in the woods. I could go on and on. There's even an abandoned theme park. And in Aaron's case, a terrifying late-night encounter on a bridge that crosses over the Cumberland River. It was the fall of 2006. Aaron was driving home after visiting a friend in Williamsburg. It was late, close to midnight, and the road through the park was nearly empty. He remembers rolling down the windows, listening to the sound of the river in the distance. The air smelled like wet leaves, and a thin fog was starting to roll across the road. As he approached the bridge, Aaron slowed down. It was an old, narrow bridge with steel beams that always made him a little uneasy. The headlights cut through the fog, lighting up the span ahead, when he saw her. Standing dead center in the road was a woman in a long, white dress. Her hair was dark, tangled, and hanging over her face. Aaron slammed the brakes and swerved hard to the left, his tires screeching against the damp pavement. His heart leapt to his throat. He was sure that he had just hit this woman. His car came to a stop about halfway across the bridge. Breathing heavily with his hands shaking, he looked in the rearview mirror. There was nothing. The road behind him was empty. Confused, he got out of the car. The cool night air hit him instantly, and he called out, "Hey, are you okay?" But his voice, it just echoed off the water below. There was nobody on this bridge with Aaron. Shaken, Aaron climbed back into the driver's seat, and that's when he noticed something that made his stomach drop. On the windshield, right in front of him, were muddy handprints. Not streaks like a branch had brushed against the glass. These were distinct, with fingers and palms pressed firmly into the glass. It was too high up to be his, and too wide to be mistaken for anything else. And worse, The prints weren't sliding down like somebody was leaning on the car. They were angled upward, like whoever had left them had been trying to pull themselves in through the window. Aaron panicked, and he floored the accelerator, and he didn't stop till he reached a gas station near Corbin. Under the bright fluorescent lights, he checked the car again. The handprints were still there, clear as day. He grabbed a paper towel and tried to wipe them off, but the prints wouldn't even smudge. They weren't dirt or grease or anything physical he could clean away. They were almost like a stain inside the glass itself. He ended up driving home, and by morning when he checked, the handprints were gone. Aaron eventually told his story to some locals, expecting them to laugh. But instead, one of the older men nodded and said, "You saw the woman." He explained that for decades, drivers had reported seeing a ghostly woman on the Cumberland Falls Bridge. The legend goes, in the 1930s, a young woman was supposed to meet her lover there to elope. He never showed up. Heartbroken, she jumped from the bridge into the rushing river below and was never seen again. Since then, people say her spirit lingers, appearing on the road, stepping in front of cars, or leaving wet handprints behind. Some even claim to have picked her up, only to vanish before reaching town. Aaron swears he wasn't tired and he wasn't drinking, he wasn't imagining things that night. And to this day, he won't drive that road after dark. Now, whether this woman is a restless spirit searching for a man who left her behind, or something much darker, using her image to lure people off the road, one thing is for certain. If you cross the bridge at Cumberland Falls, and you see a woman in white standing in the fog, don't stop. Voices in the fog. A couple camping in the Blue Ridge Mountains sit in the story. They thought they were alone until the fog rolled in. And then voices started to call their name. They said it changed how they look at the woods forever. In the summer of 2014, Eli and Rachel decided to take a weekend trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. They were both teachers on break, loved hiking, and thought a quiet camping trip would be the perfect escape. They packed a tent, sleeping bags, lanterns, a couple days worth of food, everything you would need, and they drove out to a remote campground not far from Mount Mitchell. It was a place known for its sweeping views and quiet trails, but also for how quickly the weather could change. Locals always warned, in the Blue Ridge, the fog rolls in fast. At first, it was perfect. The first night they cooked over a fire, listened to crickets, and talked until the flames died down. By midnight, they zipped themselves into the tent and had a safe, comfortable night alone in the wilderness. Or so they thought. Around 3 a.m, Eli woke up to a strange sound outside of his tent. At first, he thought it was just the wind through the trees, but when he sat up, he realized it was something else entirely. It was voices. It was faint whispering, carried on the air. He shook Rachel awake, and the two of them listened. The voices weren't clear enough to make out words, but there was definitely more than one now. A low murmur that was slowly moving around the tent. And then the fog rolled in. A thick, heavy, almost unnatural fog. The kind that muffles every sound and makes the air feel close and damp. They couldn't see it yet, but from inside the tent they could feel the air around them getting colder, wetter, and the whispering, it grew sharper. And then for the first time, they heard it. Their names. Eli. Rachel. Eli. Rachel. It was soft, and it was drawn out, as if it was spoken, right against the fabric of the tent. Terrified, Eli reached for a flashlight and unzipped the flap just a few inches. All he saw was white. The fog was so dense he couldn't even make out the fire pit that they had been using earlier. It was like opening the tent into a void. The voices were louder now, circling the tent, sometimes close, sometimes far, but never in one place for long. Rachel began to sob and begged him to zip the tent back up, which he did with shaking hands. For the next hour, the two sat frozen, clutching each other, listening as voices whispered their names again and again. At one point, something brushed against the side of the tent, leaving the faint outline of a hand pressed into the fabric, then slowly sliding down. That was the breaking point. At dawn, the voices stopped. The fog didn't lift, but the silence that followed was almost worse. As soon as the light began filtering through, Eli and Rachel unzipped the tent, threw everything in their packs, and bolted. They hiked nearly 2 miles back to their car, barely speaking, constantly glancing over their shoulders. The fog followed them almost the entire way, and it was thick and suffocating, until they reached the parking lot. When they finally shut the car doors, the air outside was suddenly clear. Just like that, the fog had vanished. When they got back to town, they told a park ranger what had happened. He didn't laugh and he didn't act surprised. Instead, he said quietly, "You camped near one of the old burial grounds, didn't you?" He explained that scattered through the Blue Ridge are unmarked graves, remnants of old settlements, accidents, and even massacres from centuries past. Locals believe the fog itself carries the spirits of the dead, searching, calling out to the living for help. Most people never hear them, but sometimes, according to local lore, if you camp in the wrong place at the wrong time, the voices know you by name. Now, Eli and Rachel have never camped in the Blue Ridge Mountains again, although they still hike the trails during the day, but they never go back out if there's a hint of fog. Because in the mountains, when the mist closes in and the voices start whispering your name, you don't know if you're being called or being claimed. The Red-Eye Watcher. This story was submitted by a hunter from eastern Kentucky. He insists he was stalked for hours by something inhuman, something with glowing red eyes that paced him through the trees. Now, he never went back to that stretch of woods again, but I really want to know what's going on there. This story comes from Clint, who grew up in eastern Kentucky near the Daniel Boone National Forest. Clint's family lived off the land. His father was a coal miner, but his real passion was hunting. And from the time Clint was old enough to carry a rifle, he was out in the woods with them. By the time Clint was in his early 20s, he thought he knew those woods better than anyone. Every trail, every ridge, even every sound an animal could make, he thought he was an expert, and he always said the woods were like a second home. But one night, in November, Clint learned the hard way that something else lived out there too. Something that watched him. The woods were dead quiet. No wind, no birds. Just the crunch of his boots on frosted leaves. He climbed into his tree stand, settled in, and waited. As the sun dipped behind the ridges, Clint noticed something strange. Normally at dusk, the woods would come alive. Owls calling, coyotes yipping, small animals rustling in the brush. But that night, it was silent. Too silent. He sat there for over an hour, watching, listening, but nothing moved. No deer, no rabbits, nothing. Just a still, heavy quiet that pressed down on him. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw them. 2 glowing red orbs about 30 yards away, staring straight at him through the trees. At first, Clint thought it was a deer caught in the last rays of light. But the eyes, they were too high for a deer. They were about level with his head up in the tree stand, and they weren't reflecting white or yellow like normal animal eyes. They were red. He blinked, thinking maybe he was imagining it, but when he looked again, they were still there, unblinking, fixed right on him. Clint raised his rifle and he peered through the scope, but when he lined his crosshairs up, the eyes were gone. Just dark woods remained. Then, from his left came the sound of heavy branches snapping. Clint whipped his head around, and there they were again. 2 glowing red eyes, pacing him, maybe 20 yards away. Every time he turned to face them, they vanished. And every time they vanished, he'd hear movement. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the underbrush, circling under his stand. Now, he tried shining a flashlight, sweeping it across the trees, but the beam lit up nothing, just empty woods. The moment he turned the lights off, though, the eyes would reappear, always closer. This game went on for nearly half an hour, eyes appearing, disappearing, movement crunching through the leaves, circling tighter and tighter around his tree stand. But by then, Clint wasn't thinking about hunting anymore. He just wanted out. Finally, heart pounding out of his chest, Clint decided he could not stay in that stand any longer. He slung his rifle, climbed down, and started the long walk back to his truck, which I think that's the bad idea because you at least had a height advantage before that. He said the moment his boots hit the ground, the woods erupted. Branches snapped, leaves crunched. He could hear the thing pacing him just out of sight. And every step he took, it took a step too, staying just a few feet inside the tree line. He walked faster, so did it. He stopped, so did it. He started to run, so did it. At one point, he shouted into the woods, "Come on out then!" But the only reply was a low, guttural growl that froze him in place. Clint said he never heard a sound like that before. No bear or bobcat made that sound. It was deep, vibrating in his chest, and full of malicious intent. When he reached the ridgeline, Clint broke into a full sprint. He could hear it running too, crashing through the brush, keeping pace. His flashlight beam bounced wildly, sometimes catching brief flashes of those red eyes flickering through the trees. At one point, something threw a branch, a thick, heavy tree branch right across the path in front of him. It slammed into the ground so hard, it snapped in two. He didn't stop, he didn't look back, he just kept running. Finally, he burst out of the tree line into the gravel lot where his truck was parked. He threw himself inside, slammed the locks, and flicked the headlights on. The beam lit up the edge of the woods. Nothing. Just trees swaying gently in the wind. No sign of the struggle he just went through getting out. But Clint swore, just before he peeled out of there, he saw those two red eyes flash once and then vanish into the dark. For weeks after, Clint refused to go back into the woods at night. When he finally did, he never went alone. And even in broad daylight, he always said he felt like something was watching them. He talked to his uncle about it, and he laughed. He said it might have been a bobcat or an owl, but it could have been him, the red-eyed watcher. Now, according to his uncle, Appalachian lore says the red-eyed watcher is an old spirit of the forest, tied to the land long before settlers came. It doesn't hurt people, but it makes sure you know you're not welcome. To this day, Clint won't say for sure what he saw that night, but whenever people ask if he still hunts, he says yes, just never up that holler again. Because if you're in the woods of eastern Kentucky and you see glowing red eyes staring at you from the tree line, it's probably already too late. The Screamer of Laurel Fork. Several families from a remote part of Kentucky all have the same story about a chilling phenomenon. An ear-splitting scream that echoes down the valley at night. Some believe it's an animal, others claim it's a restless spirit. Now, whatever it is, no one has ever tracked it to a source. Laurel Fork is one of those places you don't find unless you're lost. Tucked back in the eastern Kentucky hills, it's a narrow holler lined with old family farms, logging roads, and patches of wood so thick the sun barely breaks through. People out there don't lock their doors, not because they trust everybody, but they figure if you're coming down Laurel Fork at night, you either know the land or you've made a mistake. And that's what makes the screams so unsettling. For decades, families living in Laurel Fork have told the same story. Late at night, usually after midnight, a sound will roll down the valley. At first it's faint, like the cry of a fox or a high-pitched yowl of a bobcat. But then it builds, it stretches, it takes on this human edge. People describe it as a woman screaming, long, drawn out, like she's begging for help. Others say it's not human at all, but the wail of a banshee, tearing through the treetops and rattling the windows of houses. But not once has anybody ever tracked it to its source. The earliest reports come from the Carter family back in the 1970s. They lived in a little farmhouse right where the road bent around a creek. Late one August night, Mr. Carter was sitting on the porch when he heard it. A long, shrill scream that came from the ridge right behind his barn. At first he thought it was a panther, and the people around there still swore they roamed the hills. But when he whistled for his dogs, they didn't budge. They didn't bark, they didn't growl, they didn't even come out from under the porch. They just whined. And when the scream came again, closer this time, he swore it felt like the air itself vibrated his chest. He grabbed a shotgun and walked out to the edge of the yard and aimed it toward the tree line. But just before he pulled the trigger, the scream cut off, leaving dead silence behind. Not even the sound of crickets. He stood there holding his breath until he finally heard the faintest crunch of leaves, like somebody was walking up the ridge. But he never saw a thing. Years later, the Hensley family, who lived on the opposite end of Laurel Fork, had their own encounter. Their teenage son had been coming back from a football game, driving up the gravel road when he heard it. At first he thought it was somebody playing a prank, a girl screaming for attention. But when it happened again, louder and angrier, he swore it was following his truck. Every time he rounded a bend, the scream was right behind him, as if something was pacing his headlights in the woods. By the time he reached his driveway, the boy was pale and shaking. He left his truck running, sprinted inside, and yelled that the screamer was after him. That name stuck. Over time, people in the holler started sharing stories. Hunters claimed they'd hear it right before dawn echoing through the fog. One man said he'd been out spotlighting deer when the scream ripped across the ridge and every animal in sight bolted at once. Another woman swore she heard it calling her name, stretched out and distorted as if the woods themselves were mocking her. Skeptics, of course, had explanations. They said it was just a bobcat or maybe a mountain lion, but some people thought it might have been a vixen fox, which can make noises that sound eerily like a woman crying. But the people who heard the screamer will tell you those animals don't follow you. They don't scream for hours, circling the same holler night after night. Now, there's one more detail that makes this story stranger. In the 1930s, long before these reports, there was a small coal camp near Laurel Fork. It's not there anymore. Most of it rotted away or got swallowed up by the forest. But back then, it was a tight-knit community. According to local lore, a young woman went missing one evening after fetching water from the creek. Neighbors heard a terrible scream coming from the ridge, but by the time they went out to search, she was gone. Her body was never found. Some believe she had ran off. Others thought she had fallen into an abandoned mine shaft. But older folks in Laurel Fork will look you in the eye and tell you that was the night the screamer was born. The most chilling part, to this day, the screamer is still heard. As recently as last year, campers near the head of the holler reported being woke up at 2 a.m. to this piercing wail that rolled across the valley like thunder. They thought it was another camper playing a joke until they realized they were the only ones out there. Now, locals will tell you, if you spend enough nights in Laurel Fork, you'll hear it too. And when you do, the advice is simple. Don't follow it. Don't step off your porch. Don't walk into the woods. Don't even call out to it. Because whatever the hell is out there making that sound, whether it's a mountain cat, a restless spirit, or something else entirely, it's not looking for help. It's looking for you. If you're enjoying these tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, hype the video, and shoot me an email with your terrifying tale if you have one to share. I genuinely appreciate any support I get because I never expected to have 10 subscribers, much less 12,000. Anyway, thank you all,